Hi, welcome to WorkCompTalk, a podcast dedicated for injured workers with lots of conversations and topics regarding workers' comp, and not just with anyone, but managing attorney of Pacific Workers, the lawyers for injured workers, and an attorney himself, of course, Bilal Qasim. I'm like, imagine us having a conversation with just the random guy next door who just so happened to go through a workers' comp case and feels like he knows everything about it. Not the case.
No, I've done it a while.
Yes, and it's also sponsored by Pacific Workers, the lawyers for injured workers. You can go ahead and check that website out at www.pacificworkers.com if you need a free consultation, second opinion, if you just have questions regarding some of those, what would you call them? Not annoying situations that you can go through in workers' comp, but just, how random people just want to have a couple questions answered. Consultations are free. You can totally give the company a call and they can set you up to speak to an attorney and get that consultation for free. Speaking about for free, the type of information we give on this podcast is free. Anyone can dive into these videos and essentially learn a lot from the system, from Bilal, and from other people who have essentially been going through some workers' comp cases. And through their stories, we talk a lot about some of the scenarios and situations you might be facing if you're currently fighting a workers' comp claim. So without further ado, speaking about conversations, recently I bumped into a message on YouTube and it just so brought my attention that, this is a really great topic that we haven't touched in the past for the podcast, and that's AMEs versus QMEs. And for those of you that don't understand what an AME is, it's an Agreed Medical Evaluator versus a Qualified Medical Evaluator. We have talked about getting second Qualified Medical Evaluations, and you can check those videos out. We'll leave the links for you on the description of this video. And we also know the importance of an evaluator to a case in workers' comp. Can you dive a little bit deeper into the difference between an AME and a QME?
Sure. They're different.
Very.
That's it.
Oh my gosh. No.
No, QMEs it stands for Qualified Medical Evaluator. A QME is a doctor that you'd go to if either the insurance company denies liability for your case or you don't like the opinion of your treating physician. Okay. And vice versa. The insurance can request a QME as well. So basically they are a neutral problem solver, right? It's kind of like a mediator. If you've got a problem to work out, you go to them.
Okay, cool. So by this point, you would have already been taken to either a work clinic, whether it's Concentra or Kaiser. You've already seen a doctor, you've spoke to them, but there's issues still that need to be resolved, and that's where this doctor comes in.
Yes.
Or it's not even a doctor, it's an evaluator.
Yeah, it's an evaluator. It can be a chiropractor, for example. It can also be a psychologist who, they don't go to medical school per se.
Okay.
But that being said, you can also go to a QME because the insurance company denies liability for your case, so maybe you haven't even seen a doctor yet. And if that's the case, then the QME would be deciding whether or not your injury should be accepted by the insurance company.
Right. So before you move on with the next one, I'm going to throw all these random questions that are just going to be popping into my head because the idea is to get as much information out of this guy as possible. So what if you do end up going to a doctor? Would you ever see a QME at some point? Is this a given step for workers' comp?
I wouldn't say it's a given step in every single case, but the large majority, probably like 95% of cases, QMEs are involved. And the reason why is because either you don't like the opinion of your treating doctor or the insurance company doesn't. So they want to challenge that. Sometimes, though, both parties will say, you know what? We're cool with the treating doctor's opinion. More often than not, that's not the first doctor that the insurance company sends you to. But there are occasions where, for example, we've taken on a client, we've designated a new treating physician, and the treating physician gives us reports and talks about things like permanent disability and future medical needs. And the insurance company looks at the report and says, this is probably a pretty fair report. And we don't really need to go to a QME. If you guys are good with this report, we're good with it too. And so sometimes, that's how we can resolve a case. But most of the time, there's one side that doesn't like the doctor's opinion. I would say almost all the time that's the case.
And this is important to know, too. These scenarios we're talking about are someone who's being represented by an attorney. For example, if you had a client and you kind of see that whatever the doctor is putting out there for you, for your client doesn't make sense, you would request the QME. However, if someone is not being represented by an attorney, how do they even know they have that option?
So the insurance company is obligated to send them a QME notice. And it's a form. It might be pretty confusing to someone who's not been through the system before, but they're obligated to disclose these things to you. There are certain state forms that the insurance company is required to provide you. Of course, sometimes they don't. You know, you don't know what you don't know, so maybe you're not realizing that you're entitled to that. And maybe you'll just drop your case or take whatever the treating physician says is the gospel, and that's it. You know.
That sucks. If that's the case, for those people that have not realized that how important a qualified medical evaluator is, you could potentially be losing a lot of money and leaving a lot of benefits on the table just because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, and so the process to go to a QME, it's kind of the same whether or not you're represented. The big difference is when you're unrepresented, you choose your QME versus a striking process, and also at the same time, you kind of have to understand who the QMEs are really. And, you know, there's certainly doctors that play sides, and there's different specialties that are more appropriate given the nature of a specific injury or condition. And so knowing which specialty to choose and which QME to choose from the state issued panel is an art in and of itself.
That's good to know. I like that you put it that way, because I think it's an important, you know, aspect of this process, which is knowing who you're choosing as a doctor. Though you have the ability to go through the list of doctors that are providing, and there's only so much you can find on Google on a doctor, technically.
Yep.
When you do hire an attorney, the positive behind it, and I've seen this myself, it's like a lot of the times you guys already know the doctors. You kind of already know who are the shady ones. Like, we want to stay away from that one. But talk to me a little bit more about the striking process. What did you mean by the striking process?
So let's say you choose a specialty for your QME. So you want to go to orthopedics or physical medicine, rehabilitation, chiropractic, whatever it is, and you request that panel from the state will issue a panel with 3 evaluators on it. And when you're represented by an attorney, each side strikes a doctor they don't like.
Okay.
And so the whole idea is that a panel of 3 evaluators, there should be someone on there that both parties are kind of like, I don't want to strike that one because they're probably okay.
Okay.
Sometimes all the evaluators on the panel are terrible, and you're kind of picking the best of the worst.
Gotcha.
Other times, all the evaluators on the panel are fantastic. And so you're like, this is great. You know, my client's going to get a good evaluation regardless of who is on this panel and who is not struck. And so each side strikes the doctor, and the doctor that wasn't struck or the evaluator that wasn't struck serves as the QME in the case.
What if you guys both struck the same doctor?
Well, then the other side gets to strike again, or you get to strike again, depending on who struck first.
Okay.
So, you know, usually I would say that happens sometimes, it's crossover in the mail. Not all that often, because it's pretty clear. You know, usually we're not going to strike the same doctor as the other side because there's like a preference, you know.
Of course. They'll preference the doctor that is like...
Exactly. So we're not going to strike the doctor that's, you know, the worst case scenario or best case scenario for us, you know, just like they wouldn't do that on their side too. So, you know.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is very important. Is there anything else we need to know as far as like qualified medical evaluations? We know that you can have more than one.
Yep. So you have a QME for every specialty that's required to address the nature of your injuries. So if you have a crossover case where, you know, maybe someone had more than one body system involved. So if it's like cardiovascular system as well as orthopedics, you know, your orthopedic surgeon can't evaluate the whole entire case. So you probably have multiple panels, one for internal medicine as well. If you need to go back to the QME because you weren't permanent and stationary the first time you saw them, you might need to be reevaluated. Or if there's additional body parts that are added later in the case, those would need to be addressed by the same QME. Also, sometimes the QME is kind of your gateway to just continuing on with the case. When you have a situation where, let's say you're released from care with no need for future medical care, you can't simply just go and designate a new treating physician to take over. The insurance company do is they'll say, well, we're not authorizing any more care because you were released from care with no need for follow-up. And so going to a QME can sometimes be your only option to actually getting to a new doctor.
Yikes. So, I mean, good to know, but that's a scary situation to be in.
Yeah, and that's why we always kind of preach and try to practice this ourselves. We prioritize changing the treating physician, if appropriate, as soon as possible before they issue a report that says something like that. Because once it's done, and the insurance company will rest on that.
Of course.
Yeah. So that I think it's important to know that, sometimes you can't just do whatever you want, and the QME can be a major stepping stone in the case to getting to where you need to be, but that can often take times.
So a QME essentially in the real world would be, I'm going to put this as a boxing match. You have the two opponents, and then you have the ref in the middle. The QME would be the ref in the middle that tells you can't do that, you can't do that, but essentially plays a neutral role for both sides and then just speaks the truth.
It's supposed to be, yeah. But yeah.
Supposed to be.
And also, too, I'd say, the QME, like you said, they don't work for us. They don't work for the insurance company. They're supposed to be neutral, so that, they're not supposed to have anyone's particular interest at heart. They don't provide treatment. They don't do anything in the case except give their opinion, really.
Right. And they're also not going to treat you. So if you have a qualified medical evaluator or a QME appointment coming up, don't expect to get a full, thorough physical exam, and they're going to check your injuries and such. Like, what do you expect when you walk into a QME office?
All it is an evaluation. Maybe they do some testing, diagnostics. Maybe they send you out for an MRI or X-ray or EMG study, or they do some other, blood or drug testing. But it's just an evaluation, and that's it. I think the most important part about QMEs that people kind of get surprised to hear is that it takes a while to actually get to them. So you could have a denied case from the insurance company, and just getting to a QME evaluation can take months.
Yikes.
From the time you get the panel to the time that both parties strike to the time you actually get scheduled with the physician. And then even after the evaluation, they have 30 days to write their initial report.
Woof.
So, you could have a denied case that takes 4 months just to get the report back. And then even then, you still have to fight to get the case accepted. So, it's a scenario where I think people expect, oh, well, there's a QME, it just happens immediately. They write their report immediately. Everything gets fixed and I'm good. Sometimes it can take months and months to actually get anywhere with the QME report, even if it's favorable.
I'm so glad you brought those time limits up, because I don't think people even know that even happens. They'll blame it on you guys, the attorneys. Like, you're not doing anything.
Yeah, and, it's frustrating for us, too, because, it is a slow system and we can only do so much within that system.
That sucks. Okay, well, now we know what the QME is, and we're going to be, again, once diving into more of the QME stuff and leaving some links on the description, so make sure you check out those videos. Now introduce us to an AME, which is an Agreed Medical Evaluator. What's all that about?
So an Agreed Medical Evaluator typically serves in place of where a QME would. The whole idea is that an Agreed Medical Evaluator is someone who we feel as though is trustworthy and will be fair and unbiased, and the insurance carrier feels the same way. So we're meeting on neutral ground. It's basically looking at it and saying, look, who's an evaluator that knows their stuff, who's going to call it like it is, and write a thorough report, review all the medical records, do a good job with the evaluation, and give both parties what it is they want, which is just an honest to God opinion about the case.
Yeah.
On the applicant side, our side, we're not looking to fluff up cases. We just want a fair shake for our clients, and I think to some extent AMEs are able to do that.
So you're telling me if you go through a workers' comp case and they've treated you like shit and they've treated you like a freaking piece of gum stuck on the sidewalk, you're not going to fluff up the case just a little?
No, I mean, I should say the workers' comp system is unfair. It's slow. It's behind the times. It doesn't pay nearly enough. Clients don't get the medical treatment they deserve. We try to get them everything they deserve within the confines of the system. And we can't lie. We can't commit fraud.
Yeah.
We can only ask the evaluating doctors to do their job.
Right.
And give the applicant the best shot possible at getting everything addressed that needs to be addressed.
And I've also seen it too. There's been cases where the fluff won't even come on your side. The insurance company just so happens to fluff it, and it's a lucky shot.
Well, I mean, it's indefensible sometimes. So, like, if I send a client to a QME or an AME, and they've got a finger injury, and the AME comes back and says, you know what, they're 100% disabled, they're never going to work again, and it's like a splinter. Sure, it's great. I would be happy if the insurance company wanted to pay like $10 million to settle that case.
For a splinter.
But it's worthless because there's no possible way that opinion would hold up in court. And so when I say we don't want them to fluff things, we don't want that. We don't want them to like shoot so far above what's what the reality is of the case, that the report just becomes
That's good to know.
worthless. So
That is good to know.
we ask them to just be honest with themselves and our clients, and do right by them and evaluating them fairly.
Okay. So now AME, when does that come into play? If you have an attorney and you're already getting put in behind a QME, why would you request an AME?
Sometimes there's a dispute over the QME, whether or not the QME was validly selected in the first place, or the appropriate specialty, or maybe we got a really good panel and the insurance company hates that, and so they're like, hey, let's try and throw an AME out there to see if we can get away from that doctor that's going to be completely unfavorable to us. And we do the same thing. If we get a bad evaluator on panels that we end up with, we might be like, hey, how about we go to an AME instead? But the whole idea behind an AME is that both parties agree to that doctor to serve as kind of the mediator. And to that extent, their opinion is kind of held supreme above all else.
Gotcha.
Which is a major difference from QMEs. So when you agree to a medical evaluator, they don't come from a panel or anything like that. It's just throw out names that everyone agrees to it, the evaluation gets set up, and that's that.
Nice. Yeah. So an AME's power, essentially, they're above a QME. Like a QME is just part of an MPN list, but when things don't go well with a QME, that's when you move up to an AME.
Kind of. So you have to think about it like this. You get PTPs, right? The primary treating physician. They come from MPNs. They're your doctor that's actually doing treatment you're seeing regularly. Your QME is kind of your mediator of sorts, but they're selected from a state-issued panel, so you have zero control over who actually ends up on the panels. And the AME is just someone that you pick.
Gotcha.
Completely.
Do they have to be in the medical providing network, the MPN list?
No.
Oh,
no.
Nice.
They're just evaluators that you choose. And I think the big difference between all of them is that, PTPs and QMEs come from medical provider networks and state-issued panels. That's where they both, originate from. And so when you're talking about a QME from a state-issued panel, I didn't have that particular choice. I didn't have freedom to select whoever I want. Mm-hmm. And same thing for the PTP. They're from the MPN. I'm within the network. I can't go out and choose whatever doctor I want to give their opinion and treat me. So because of that, the court looks at AMEs differently because they're like, hey, this isn't someone you just got stuck with. Like, this is a doctor that you selected personally because you believed that they would write a great report and be fair and do all that stuff. So generally speaking, once you have an AME on the case, the court will not really scrutinize the AME as much as they may a QME or a PTP.
So why go to a QME if I can just go to an AME?
Well, AME isn't compulsory, so it's up to both the insurance company and the attorney to agree to an AME. And sometimes the insurance company doesn't want to use an AME. Right. Sometimes we don't either. So you can't force it.
And can anyone get an AME with or without an attorney?
No. So if you're unrepresented, you cannot have an AME.
Okay. So that option's only available if you have legal representation. Why?
Yeah. Just because the insurance company would have a disproportionate advantage. They'd be able to. You have claims professionals who know all the doctors, and so they would probably throw out names that are really biased and unfair to the applicant. And if the applicant, the injured worker, didn't know the doctors and got kind of suckered into agreeing to them as the agreed medical evaluator, it'd ruin their whole case.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so you can only really have an AME when there's a lawyer because obviously
both sides know what they're doing.
Yeah, both sides know what they're doing.
So there's no
so it's a fair exchange, yeah.
Gotcha. That totally makes sense. Is there anything else besides what we've already spoken about, which is essentially there are times where you're going to get more than one QME. There's times where, QMEs will be your friends. There'll be times where they're not your friends. We understand that the AME component only comes if you're represented. AMEs can be outside of the medical providing network. Anything else we need to know between one or the other? I'm pretty sure there's a ton more.
Yeah. There's probably a lot. But
of course.
I think I would say this. There are some times where maybe a QME is a better option because I feel like there's less pressure on the QME to please everyone.
Gotcha.
If you're a super injured worker oriented QME, like, you can do whatever you want. You can write whatever you want in your reports, and you'll probably still get business because you come from a state issued panel versus an agreed medical evaluator. I think there's maybe some pressure to be kind of play to both sides a little bit because you were selected in agreement by both parties. And if you piss off one side, maybe they're not going to use you the next time.
Exactly.
So like, I have nothing to base that on.
Gotcha.
That's just pure conjecture. That's just me thinking, well, hey, look, if I'm a people pleaser and these people want to use me and like I'm like going to upset one side, maybe they won't use me in the future. So I feel like maybe I'm not going to like knock it out of the park for one, but for the other. Of course, that's just, again, speculation. At the same time, the medical record, the injuries, they all speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And like I said, we don't ask people to make things up. We don't ask people to knock it out of the park when it's not warranted. We just ask for our evaluators that we work with to give our clients a fair evaluation, review all the medical records, write a comprehensive report, and that's it.
And do their job.
Just do the job. That's it.
Speaking about reports, we know the importance that a QME and an AME holds in a case, right? Because essentially, when things are not falling into place how you'd like them to, either side of the workers' comp claim, the QME comes and neutralizes everything and puts their input in a neutral, biased, I guess, mental state where they put what they believe is right, what they believe is wrong, right? This is a very powerful decision. This is a very important step. What happens if at the moment you had your QME, you were in one state and then months are going by and you're still fighting your case and something else happens that the QME didn't catch because time?
Yeah, it happens all the time. People's conditions change. They get subsequent injuries that occur, or complications from medical treatment. We've had clients, for example, who have like strokes and things like that post-surgery after they've been evaluated. You go back to the QME and have those things addressed.
So you would have to go back again to the QME and figure that does that start it all over again, the entire like...
No, because you can either do one of two things. You can either have the person be reevaluated by the QME, or you can send the QME the medical records and just ask for what's called a supplemental report to address whatever it is that popped up in the case. You see that a lot with the defendants who they take the injured worker's deposition and find out that the injured worker had maybe some pre-existing issues that weren't necessarily discussed in great detail by the QME. Maybe the QME notes like, oh, this person had a history of a car accident, but kind of just glosses over it. And then once they take the injured worker's deposition, they find out that the person had a serious accident. There was lots of medical treatment, all that stuff. Then they'll subpoena the records and send those back to the QME to say, hey, QME, here's some medical records that show this person had a car accident, had injuries. Did these change your opinion?
Gotcha.
So
that makes sense.
It does happen.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of information to digest. So, again, AMEs, QMEs, both equally important. You could only get an AME if you have an attorney. If there's any second opinion you'd like to get from your QME or just from another attorney, those also are free. You can, even if you have an attorney, doesn't mean you can't reach out to another one, just for a second evaluation or just consultation, I guess. But these are important. One last tip you can give to the viewer who's watching this podcast and learning about AMEs and QMEs before we wrap this up.
Last tip. I have like 50 tips.
Oh, gosh.
Honestly, just if you're going to go to a QME, make sure you get the right one. Know who you're picking. AMEs, if your attorney set you up with an AME, you should have faith in them. It's probably, I would think if I was an injured worker and my attorney had set me up with an AME evaluation, my recommendation to me would be like, hey, your attorney knows what they're doing and they set you up with this doctor because they think they're going to be a fair evaluator. Trust in what they have to say.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well, thank you so much for sharing this information. I hope you guys learned a little bit about the QMEs and the AMEs. If you have any questions, please make sure you drop them down on the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you get a notification every time we have a new episode as well. If you haven't checked us out on TikTok, social media, Facebook, Instagram, and of course our website, WorkCompTalk.net, make sure you do so now so you also get information in regards to some of the topics. Once again, thanks again. And we'll catch you guys on the next episode.